We are working our way through the book of Deuteronomy, and we've got as far as the 14th chapter. And my prayer, guys, Wednesday nights, it's kind of our midweek study, and those of you that I know, life and work and busy, and I know for me, it's kind of one of those, like I need to I can't live from Sunday to Sunday gathering together with the saints and getting the Word of God and just, being poured into, I think just kind of helping us get over the rest of the week. I know that's for myself as well as for you guys, but also, I appreciate just the intimacy and I always look at Wednesday night as kind of the core, right? And those that are going, man, I want to grow and I want to know God in a greater way. And my prayer is that through this time that we're falling in love with the Old Testament writings, that you and I are sharing this together. But I think it's incredible because you start to understand the heart of God as you're reading through the Old Testament. And this particular passage that we're going to cover tonight, I think it's amazing because God is laying out for the children of Israel some very clear direction for the new life that they're going to live in the promised land. And you look at these Old Testament principles and these Old Testament, and a lot of it's the law that he's going to be kind of defining to them. But I think within all of these things, you start to see the heart of God. And it's through these things, so many of these principles we find also given to us in the New Testament. And I think the more you understand the Old Testament, the more you're going to understand the New Testament. You understand this relationship that God was desiring to have with the nation of Israel. And then now he's in this new covenant that's been given is this relationship that you and I have with God through Christ. And so this whole picture is incredible. We're going to begin in chapter 14, and it begins in verse 1 there. He says, "You are the children of the Lord your God. You shall not cut yourselves, nor shave the front of your head for the dead." Now God reminds them, look, remember who you are. You're the children of the Lord, your God. And being reminded of who you are, I think helps you distinguish from everybody else that's in this world. And what was happening in this culture was when someone died, there was a mourning process. And part of the mourning is they would begin to cut themselves. They would shave their heads bald. They would, go into this hopeless state. And when God is telling the children of Israel is, you guys aren't like them. You're not living a hopeless life. There's hope beyond the grave. You remember when Elijah was with the 400 prophets of Baal up on Mount Carmel. And they were calling upon their God. And it says that, they started crying out to their God and their God didn't answer. And they began to cut themselves. And it was this whole idea that, if somehow I am in some kind of sacrificial, painful life, that somehow my God's going to hear me, and I'm going to find comfort through that, or I'm going to find some kind. Think about how many of our kids today are dealing with this whole issue of cutting. It's going on rampant. We have counseled multiple kids that are hurting themselves and cutting themselves just because it's something they feel like they have control over. He says, you're not like the world. You're not like the other nations that went before you. You don't go and shave your head bald because you're mourning, or begin to cut yourself because you're mourning, because you're a child of the Lord your God. You have a hope. And that hope's beyond this life and beyond the grave. And notice what he says in verse 2 here. And I find this passage to be quite interesting. He says, "For you are a holy people to the Lord your God. And the Lord has chosen you to be a people for himself, a special treasure above all the people who are on the face of the earth. Notice God's making a distinction. You've been chosen to be God's own special people. You're his treasure. It's interesting that Peter, in 1 Peter chapter 2, verse 9, would say the very same thing to those who have put their faith in Jesus Christ. He would say in 1 Peter 2:9, he says, you are a chosen generation, you're a royal priesthood, you're a holy nation, his own special people, that you may proclaim the praises of him who called you out of darkness into his marvelous light. You see, you and I, Christian, have been set apart for God. And he doesn't want us to live like the world lives. He wants you to live different from the world. And he wants you to have a hope. And he wants you to understand your position that you have because of who he is and because of what he's accomplished in your life. And it's amazing because from this, he's going to jump right into the dietary laws. Now, they were given to them, to the children of Israel, in the book of Leviticus in great detail. Moses, remember, Moses isn't going to go into the promised land, but he's reiterating, he's highlighting some of these dietary laws and many of the other things that they were to practice as they went into the promised land. And he's wanting them to understand, look, these things are what God has instructed you guys because you're his people. Now, many of these dietary laws pertain only to Israel. Or I should say all the dietary laws pertain only to Israel. Because, and it wasn't so much that it was for their health purposes. I reading through this, you just kind of look at, there's some of these things that they're allowed to eat that could have been damaging to their health just as well as anything else that they had been eating. Think about, they're going to be able to eat the cow. But you and I know that not all cow is safe to eat, right? The mad cow disease. You can eat some of these animals and it's still not healthy for you. God is he's giving these instructions to the children of Israel because he wanted them to be distinct from the rest of the world. And they were going to have their diet laid out to them. Watch what happens in verse 3. Watch. You shall not eat any detestable things. Now, it's interesting that clean and unclean animals were defined before Leviticus and before Moses. If you go all the way back to the flood, when Noah was bringing the animals into the ark, he was instructed to bring 7 of the clean animals into the ark. And it was already defined all the way back at the flood that there was clean and unclean. And so it's amazing that as he's going to lay out to them, look, don't eat the detestable things. These are the animals which you may eat. The ox, which is good. The sheep, the goat, the deer, and the gazelle, the roe deer, the wild goat, the mountain goat, and the antelope, and the mountain sheep. And you may eat every animal with cloven hooves, having the hoof split in 2 parts, and that chew the cud among the animals. Nevertheless, of those that chew the cud or have cloven hooves, you shall not eat, such as the camel. Now, I'm glad he put that in there. Haven't had a real desire to eat a camel lately, and now I know that it might not be a good idea. You shall not eat it, such as the racks, for they chew the cud, but do not have cloven hooves. They are unclean for you. Also the swine. Now here's where we depart. Because don't eat the swine. It's unclean for you, because it has cloven hooves, yet does not chew the cud. You shall not eat their flesh, nor touch their dead carcass. These you may eat of all that are in the water. You may eat of all that have fins and scales. Now he went from the land, and now he goes to the water, and he says, look, anything that has fins and scales, it's open season. Whatever does not have fins and scales, you shall not eat it. It's unclean for you. Now, that would include, the lobster and the shrimp, and, again, departure. He's talking very specific to the nation of Israel, and he's giving them their diet, and this diet is going to distinguish them from all the other nations up into this day. It's interesting that you go to Israel, and you, if you've been to Israel with us, your diet changes really quick, because they don't eat certain things. And we're going to get into here shortly about, that you can't have the baby boiled in the mother's milk. And they lay that out in the book of Deuteronomy, and the Jews take that, and what they do with that, it says, look, you can't eat dairy and meat together. So if you're going to have creamer with your breakfast, then there's going to be no meat at your breakfast. So there's no meat at breakfast, but at dinner there's no creamer, there's no cheese. All of your dairy isn't for breakfast. It's only for dinner. And it's kind of a weird, or the other way around, dairy for breakfast, yeah, and then no dairy at dinner. And it's just your whole diet. And just the foods that don't get me wrong, I love it. It's fresh, and it's healthy, and you need it when you're there, because you're going 100 miles an hour. But what's interesting is that you are dwelling in this land that this diet has continued for thousands of years now. Because God had distinguished the children of Israel from all the nations of the world. He made them different. And it amazes me, because you look at all of these things, and God had given them such clear instructions. Look, it's not so much for any other purpose but I'm the one who's going to set your diet for you. And then I'm going to provide for you. And then I'm going to be the one who sustains you and cares for you and meets all of your needs. Your role is to obey me. My role is to be your God. And God is going to use these things in order to teach them incredible lessons, because, a little later on, in the book of Acts, Peter is up on the rooftop, and he's hungry. As a matter of fact, food was being prepared for him. Well, he's up there, probably smelling the food. And it says he goes into a trance. And it tells us that an object, a sheet, that was bound by its four corners, descends from heaven. And inside that sheet were four-footed animals of the earth, wild beasts and creeping things were there, and birds of the air. And a voice comes from heaven and says to Peter, Peter, rise, kill, and eat. And Peter says, not so, Lord, for I have never eaten anything common or unclean. Now, you have a very contradictory statement there. Whenever you hear someone say, not so, Lord, that's a problem, right? Because Lord means master, and you're going, no, master. Those words should never be in the same sentence. Not so, Lord. But that's exactly what Peter does. He says, not so, Lord, because I've never eaten anything unclean. And then he hears the voice from heaven again, and he says, what God has cleansed, you must not call common. And it was done 3 different times so that Peter would understand that God's the one who is opening up the throne room of heaven to the Gentiles, that they would be the ones who would be considered unclean or common, but God was going to reach them for the kingdom of God through the gospel of Jesus Christ. He's using all of these things to teach them this life of surrender and obedience. And so you and I look at this and go, man, what's up with all that? They can't eat certain foods. They can't even eat, bacon. They can't have pork chops. I mean, what in the world is that all about? But it was really God making them different than the rest of the world because they were the children that he was going to guide and direct. And so notice what happens in the next verse. He goes, all the clean birds you can eat, but these you shall not eat. The eagle. I'm glad that's there. The vulture. I haven't had any cravings for vulture lately. I don't know about you. Or the buzzard. Right? I mean, those are the ones that goes, don't eat the red kite, the falcon, the kite after their kinds, every raven after its kind, the ostrich, the short-eared owl, or the spotted owl. No, it doesn't say that. The seagull, the hawk after their kinds, the little owl, the screeched owl, the white owl, the jackdaw, the Korean vulture, the fisher owl, the stork, the heron after its kind, and the other thing, the hoopie, and the bat. And every creeping thing that flies is unclean for you, that it shall not be eaten. You may eat all clean birds. You shall not eat anything that dies of itself. You may give it to the alien who is within your gates, that he may eat it. Or you may sell it to a foreigner, for you are holy people to the Lord your God. You shall not boil a young goat in its mother's milk. Now, notice how God distinguishes. He gives them this long list of things, and he says, look, and anything that dies on its own, you can't eat it. But you can sell it to the foreigner that's in your gates. Now, again, I don't think God's going, poison the foreigner. That'd be a good idea. God loves the foreigner too. But what he is distinguishing is that you're different. And because I've put you as holy or separate or sanctified, you're not to be a partaker in those things. It's what's going to distinguish you. Now, the foreigner comes in, that animal dies, possibly because they weren't able to drain the blood if the animal died on its own in the same fashion. And he's going, look, that's something you can't partake in, but if the foreigner wants it and you can sell it to him, go for it. But you're distinct, you're different. And I think it's an incredible picture for us, because remember what God says at the end there, you are a holy people to the Lord your God. That's the key to this. You're a different people. You're a holy people. You're a separate people. And you're going to follow my rules and my laws and my regulations, because you're now being led by me. And really, guys, there's great application to that for our own lives. The world looks at us as Christians. They go, man, how come you act so different? How come you don't partake in certain things? But you and I were called to be different than this world. We've been called to live differently than the world. We've been called to be holy, to be set apart for the Lord. And God was giving this picture for us here in the book of Deuteronomy, as he was telling the children of Israel. Now notice what he does in verse 22. He gives them some further instructions here. He says, you shall truly tithe all the increase of your grain and the field produces year by year. You shall eat before the Lord your God in the place where he chooses to make his name abide. The tithe of your grain and your new wine and your oil, of the firstborn of your herds and your flocks, that you may learn to fear the Lord your God always. Now the children of Israel were given clear instructions. Look, you're to give a tithe. A tithe is 10%. It's a tenth. And the children of Israel were instructed of everything that comes into your household. You're to give a tenth of it to the Lord. The Pharisees were very meticulous. As a matter of fact, on Sunday in Luke's Gospel, chapter 11, Jesus is going to confront the Pharisees because they would get their herbs and they would go, 1 herb for God, 9 herbs for me. They would be meticulous and nine coins, for me, 1 coin for God. Of everything that came into their household, they were meticulous to make sure that they tithed of all of it. And then Jesus rebukes them. Because all you're doing is giving your outward, but God is looking for your heart. He wants your heart. More than any. If he has your heart, then he owns everything else too. He owns your checkbook. He owns your decision making. He owns everything. But God isn't looking for your money. God doesn't need your money. God wants your heart. And if he has your heart, then everything else is a given. God, what is it that you desire of me? Now, the Old Testament was, very, very meticulous when it came to tithing. When you go to the New Testament, it talks about giving. It doesn't even mention the word tithing, except to the Pharisees. It talks about giving from the heart, that it's a hilarious giver that God's looking at. It tells us in 2 Corinthians chapter 9, he says, let each one give as he purposes in his heart, not grudgingly or of necessity. Check this out. For God loves a cheerful giver. It's incredible because if you're doing it from your heart, I believe it's going to supersede anything that the law would put on you. Because it comes from the heart, not out of obligation or out of some kind of, formula. I want to be above and beyond what the regulation would do. I want to give to the Lord from my heart. But it's not some obligation that as Christians we I have to have an obligation. I have to give to God. You make $10,000 and you're barely making it, but I got to give $1,000 to the Lord. You know what? God doesn't need your money. Now let me tell you, you're faithful to the Lord, and God will blow your mind. He will do just above and beyond what you can imagine. Now, if you make, $10,000, you go like, man, I can barely make it. No, there's no head trip. You don't have an obligation. Now, if you make $50 million, you should probably give $25 million to the Lord. Because if you can't live on $25 million, you got issues, right? But this isn't some grudging thing that we're twisting our arms to do. It's always about God. You own me. You own everything about me. It's all yours. How do you guide me in order to bless and to reach out? He's not just going to talk about tithing into the temple. He's going to be talking about giving to the poor and meeting the needs of the people around that are less fortunate, the widow and those who are in trouble. He doesn't just put some barrier here. It just this is all about following the regulation. Not in the New Testament. With the children of Israel, though, he's giving them some very clear instructions. Look, everything that comes into your house. Look what he says in verse 23. You shall eat before the Lord your God in the place which he chooses to make his name abide, the tithe of your grain, of the new wine, of the oil, the firstborn of your herds, your flocks, that you may learn to fear the Lord your God always. And here was the intent. Because I fear God, I'm going to obey him. And I'm going to give him a tenth of everything that comes in. My wine, my oil, my animals. I mean, everything that comes into my house, a tenth of it goes to the Lord. And then watch what he says next. But if the journey's too long for you, so that you may not carry the tithe, or if the place where the Lord your God chooses to put his name is too far from you, when the Lord your God has blessed you, then you shall exchange it for money, take the money in your hand, go to the place which the Lord your God chooses, and you shall spend that money for whatever your heart desires, for oxen or sheep or for wine or similar drink, for whatever your heart desires. You shall eat there before the Lord your God, and you shall rejoice, you and your household. And God's, so there's only one place to worship God when it comes to your offerings. That was the temple. It was the place that God chooses, and it was going to be in Jerusalem, and it was going to be on Mount Moriah. It was going to be there where the temple was built. And he says, look, if it's a long journey, you can't take your goat and your ox and the things you're going to offer up to the Lord. He said, sell that stuff, and then when you get to the place that you're supposed to worship, you can buy new stuff. It's interesting that Jesus goes into the money changers in the temple because they were charging exorbitant prices in order to purchase the sacrifices. So you at home, you can sell the lamb, you get $10, but you go to the temple and it's going to cost you $50. They were taking advantage of the people that had a desire to worship God, and Jesus pulls out the whip and he starts overturning the money changers, and he started, just saying, you guys have made my house that was to be a house of prayer into a den of thieves. And so he rebukes them for it, because they were abusing their position and the people's desire to worship God, and they were using it for their own financial gain, and Jesus wasn't going to put up with it. Now, he gives them, very clear instructions. You're to tithe. If you can't take that ox with you, you can sell that ox. But when you get there, you buy, whatever your heart desires. You buy something else, but you bring it as an offering, and it's to be your tithe. And then he says in verse 27, you shall not forsake the Levite who's within your gates, for he has no part nor inheritance within you or with you. Now, the Levites were the laborers. They were the ones working at the temple, and they weren't allowed to have employment outside of the job of being a Levite, and they weren't allowed to own any land on their own. They were given their lives over to the service of the Lord, and in doing so, it was the responsibility of those who were benefiting from their service to help support them. And it was a principle that God was giving to the children of Israel in great detail in the book of Leviticus as well. That, look, you have to care for those that are serving your spiritual needs. In the New Testament, Paul would say that the elders who are among you were to be counted worthy of double honor. And then he would use this passage out of the Old Testament: you shall not muzzle an ox while it treads the grain, and a laborer is worthy of his wages. Interesting. And that's really what's happening with the Levites. These guys are laboring, and they should be able to survive because they're laboring for your benefit. And so he lays out, again, the principles here for the children of Israel as they go into the promised land. And Paul laid out those same principles for those that are benefiting from the spiritual labor of those who are serving. And so it's incredible, all of these Old Testament principles taken into the New Testament too. And so he gives us some very incredible insight here. Well, look what happens in verse 28 now. At the end of every third year, you shall bring out the tithe of your produce of that year and store it within your gates. And the Levites, because he has no portion or inheritance within you, and the stranger and the fatherless and the widow who are within your gates may come and eat and be satisfied, that the Lord your God may bless you in all the works of your hand which you do. No, he's saying, just meeting the idea of coming to the temple and worshiping, or meeting the needs of the Levites. Every third year, you're to take an additional tithe, an additional 10%. And you're to store it within your gates so that those who are in need have the ability to survive. The widow, the stranger, the fatherless. And, you look at that, you're going, man, God's just not asking for a tithe. He's asking for, a tithe plus another 10% every 3 years. And then as you go down a little bit further, he's going to say, hey, every 7 years, I want you to cancel the debt of anyone who owes you anything. Cancel the debt. And then you're to be very generous to someone who owes you money, and become your bond servant, and you're to let them free after 6 years of service, and then every firstborn animal. And you're going, whoa, man, how are they going to live? Seems like they're giving away everything. But here was the promise that God's given to them. He says, look, you do what I've asked you to do, and I'll bless you. And I think that's the principle, guys. You do what God's asked you to do, and God will bless you. And I've seen God, over the 30 years I've been walking with the Lord, man, he just blows my mind. Because even when, I go, God, it don't make sense for me to give you anything. We're not going to make it, or especially, first being married with my young family. And I was like, God, I don't even get this. I don't know how you're going to do this. But I remember just going, you know what, God, you got to be first, and giving the Lord. And God would supply out of the most interesting ways our needs. He'd blow my mind. Yeah, I've shared with you guys the stories. I remember one time I got a rebate check for a couple $100, and we were, I didn't know how I was going to make the house payment, and a rebate check for something I never rebated. I ran to the bank, cashed that thing right away, and put it in the bank because they were going to come and take it away, But God, he always supplies your need when you put him first. Not out of obligation, not out of someone, persuasion, but because God, you're going to be first in my life. You're going to be my priority. You're going to be the one who always takes the precedence. And if you don't have the precedence in this area, you're not going to have the precedence in any other area of my life either. It's a heart thing. And that's what God was wanting the children of Israel. Look, I want you to fear me. I want you to follow me. I want you to know me. I want you to do this because you love me. This is the motivation in our giving. And when it comes to, obeying the things that God has instructed the children of Israel. What's he looking at? A relationship. That they learn to trust. That they learn to fear, respect, to honor God. And as they go into the land, God's saying, look, I'm going to be the one who meets all your needs. Notice what he said at the end of verse 29. Be sad that the Lord your God may bless you in all the works of your hand which you do. You do these things, and you watch what God will do. Now, many times you go through the book of Haggai. The children of Israel were so busy building their own houses and, trying to live in luxury, but they neglected the house of God. And God says this, he goes, you go out and you work and you work and you work and you put all your money in a bag, but he says, what you don't know is your bag has holes in it. You're never satisfied. You're never content. You never have enough because your priorities are out of order. I'm not first. You've neglected to do the things that are more important. And so God goes, look, I put the holes in your bag and I blew away all that you were trying to store up. Because you can't be satisfied unless God is on the throne of your heart. And God's getting this, this very clearly laid out with them, as he's bringing them into the promised land. Look at chapter 15. We're gonna go for it. It says, at the end of every 7 years, you shall grant a release of debts. And this is the form of release. Every creditor who has lent anything to his neighbor shall release it. You shall not require it of his neighbor or his brother, because it is called the Lord's release. Or a foreigner, you may require it, of a foreigner you may require it, but you shall not give up your claim to what is owed by your brother. You shall give up your claim of what is owed to you by your brother. Verse 4, except when there may be no poor among you, for the Lord will greatly bless you in the land which the Lord your God has given you to possess as an inheritance. Now, notice what God tells him. If it's a brother, and after every 7 years, if he has a debt, you're to be debt free. Now, wouldn't that be a wonderful law to put into place? You know, you 7 years you pay in your house, and then you write the mortgage company and say, hey, it's the 7th year, I'm done. He says, look, if it's a brother, on the 7th year, you're to release him of his debt. And in doing so, the Lord will greatly bless you in the land which the Lord your God is giving you. Now, notice what God is reminding them. I'm the one who gave you everything. The land that you're going to, you didn't buy it, you didn't earn it, you didn't deserve it. I gave it to you. I provided it for you. Now I'm asking you to be, faithful with the things I'm instructing you to do. And if you do that, I'm going to bless you even above that. I'm going to greatly bless you. Notice what he says in verse 5. Only if you carefully obey the voice of the Lord your God, to observe with care all these commandments which I command you today, for the Lord your God will bless you just as he promised you. You shall lend to many nations, but you shall not borrow. You shall reign over many nations, and they shall not reign over you. Look, you do the things I've asked you to do, and you're going to be the one that's lending and not borrowing, because I'm going to bless you abundantly. Guys, the borrower is a slave to the lender. And God's promising you, it don't equate, it don't add up. I'm going to be giving, wiping out debt. I'm going to be giving 10% plus every 3 years another 10% on top of the 10%. How am I ever going to get ahead? And God's saying, you just obey me and leave that to me. I'll bless you. I'll supply your needs. If you do these things, all the other nations are going to come to you to borrow, but you're not going to go to them to borrow. It's incredible, because you look at our nation right now, and you look at the debt that we're in, over $20 trillion in debt to China and to many other nations around the world, and we've become the borrower rather than the lender, and that wasn't always the case. And I would guess that it correlates when we began to turn away from God. When we started saying, no more prayer in school, no more Bible in school, no more God in the public square. And once you begin to take God out of the equation, then you become the borrower rather than the lender. And that's what God is telling the nation of Israel. Look, you put me first, and I will be the one who supplies you. But if you want to do this some other way, then you're on your own. Now, God's concern was not only for the temple. It wasn't only for the debtor. Imagine being 7 years in debt, and then you get your whole debt written off. And what an incredible time that would be, you're just like, man, it all wiped out. Just all done away with. But God was also concerned for those who were in need. Look what he says in verse 7. If there is among you a poor man of your brethren within any of the gates in your land which the Lord your God has given you, you shall not harden your heart nor shut your hand from your poor brother, but you shall open your hand wide to him and willingly lend him sufficient for his need, whatever he needs. Beware, lest there be a wicked thought in your heart, saying, the 7th year, the year of release is at hand, and your eye be evil against your poor brother, and you give him nothing, and he cry out to the Lord against you, and it become sin among you. Now, God knows how messed up we are. You're kind of going, man, we're coming up in the 7th year in 6 months, and I'm going to lend this guy money, and then he's not going to have to pay me back. Forget that. He goes, don't let your wicked heart, start to connive on how come you can't lend him what he needs to get by right now because, the 7th year, I'll wait till January 1st, and then we'll talk. He goes, man, give him what he needs now. Open your hand. That's generosity, right? Be generous to someone in need, someone that's poor. And don't close your hand. Don't be tight-fisted because you're thinking, man, the year of Jubilee is coming, or the 7th year, I should say, is coming, and so I'm gonna lend him. God goes, that's going to be sin on your part because you're more concerned about your money than you are about the need of that person. And so he just very, very concerned about those that are in need. Look at verse 10. You shall surely give to him, and your heart should not be grieved when you give to him, because for this thing the Lord your God will bless you in all of your works and in all to which you put your hand. Guys, I just love it. I love that God's going, look, don't worry about what you're going to lose. God is going to bless you for it. God is going to meet your need exceedingly, abundantly above what you just gave away. Because God is the one who's in control. God owns the cattle on 1,000 hills. Guys, he's able to supply our needs. He's asking us to trust him enough, to have enough faith to do what he's asked us to do. And in doing so, he's able to do that. He says, look at verse 11. For the poor will never cease from the land. Therefore I command you, saying, you shall open your hand wide to your brother, to your poor and your needy in your land. Because the poor are always going to be there. Therefore, reach out to them. Open your hand to them. Make sure they have food on their table. Make sure that they're able to be sustained, and just the heart of God. Now, the children of Israel were to what? They were to represent God. And so God gives them the command. Look, don't be stingy. Don't start looking about life. I give them to this, and now, I'm grieved. I had to do it. I'm obligated. He goes, man, let it be a heart thing. Let it be out of your heart. You do it, and then watch what God will do. Amazing. Look at verse 12. Now, if your brother, which is a Hebrew man or a Hebrew woman, is sold to you and serves you for 6 years, on the 7th year you shall let him go free from you. When you send him away free from you, you shall not let him go away empty-handed. You shall supply him liberally from your flock, from your threshing floor, and from your winepress. From what the Lord your God has blessed you with, you shall give to him. Now, oftentimes when someone was in debt and they didn't have the ability to pay back their debt, they would sell themselves into slavery to the one that they owed. And if it's a Hebrew man or woman, he says, look, after 6 years of service, they're obligated to, up to 6 years, they have to serve you. But on the 7th year that they're there, you're to let them go free. And you're not to let them go free and just go, okay, you're done, get out of here. You're to make sure that they have enough to survive. Give them, an animal, give them a little bit of, food to sustain so they can get on their feet again. And he says, you're obligated to do that because God's the one who's giving you everything else. You take care of their need. Now, God has to put that there because he knows how messed up we are. If God did instruct him and say, okay, you did your 6 years, bum, get out of here. Thanks, by the way, for all your hard work. But he goes, no, you're going to take care of them. And then I love this. God tells him in verse 15, you shall remember that you were a slave in the land of Egypt. And the Lord your God redeemed you. Therefore, I command you this thing today. Don't forget where you came. You were a slave. And I took you out of your slavery. And then I'm going to give you all of the land that you didn't earn or you didn't deserve. I'm going to give it to you anyway. Don't forget that. Now, this next section I think is quite amazing. He says, if it happens that he says to you, this slave that served you for 6 years, I will not go away from you because he loves you and your house since he prospers with you. Then you shall take an awl. You guys know what an awl is, right? That's to puncture, to hit into the wood, an awl. It's a carpentry tool. He goes, you're to take an awl and you walk him over to the doorpost of your house. And you put his ear there. And you get that all. This doesn't sound fun. It's not like getting an ear pierced where you kind of go and, they ice it or numb it or. You're walking over to the doorpost and you got this pretty sizable piece of metal that's just going to get punctured right through your earlobe. He says, walk him over. Grab him by the ear. And he says, take that awl, thrust it through his ear to the door. Now, that's painful already. And it wasn't tap it, it's thrust it. He shall be your servant forever. Also your female servant you shall do likewise. It shall not seem hard to you when you send away free from you, for he has been worth a double hired servant in serving you 6 years, and the Lord your God will bless you in all that you do. Now, here's the picture here, and I think it's an incredible picture. This servant has every right to leave. He served his time. He did his duty. He paid for 6 years. He did everything. But that servant goes, you know what? Where am I going to go? Everything I have is here. My master's been good to me, and I love him. I don't want to go anywhere. I want to stay here. And you walk over and say, you know what? I want to be a bondservant now. And a bondservant is different than a servant. A bondservant is there not out of obligation. A bondservant there is there out of his own free will. And you're going, from now on until the day I die, I want to stay here. I want to serve you. And guys, I think there's a bigger picture than what the nation of Israel is being instructed here. Peter in 2 Peter chapter 1, he says, Simon Peter, a bondservant and an apostle of Jesus Christ. Paul in most of his epistles says, Paul, a bondservant of God, an apostle of Jesus Christ. It's a free will servant. It's someone that says, God, I don't have to follow you, but I don't want to go anywhere else. Everything I have is here. You've been a good master. You've been a good, faithful master, and I don't want another master but you all the days of my life. Again, it's a heart thing. It's a heart thing. And I tell you, man, there's not another master that I'd ever desire than my Lord, Jesus, over my life. You see, I served a different master for many years. He was cruel. The drugs, the alcohol, the emptiness, the thoughts of suicide, the devil and this world and all the things that I was serving was a cruel master. But now, I have a master that I love with all my heart. And I don't want to go anywhere. I want him to rule and to reign over my life till the day I die and into eternity. I want him to be my master. So I've taken my life and, went to the doorpost and said, God, I'm yours. Put that all through me. Let me be one who's surrendered and submitted to you all the days of my life. Now, it's interesting that servant, that slave, I should say, had every right to go do whatever he wants to do. He had the right to go and live his life in a different location, to go and try to, find some other purpose or some other direction or some other trade or whatever his heart desired. He had the right to do that. But he chose not to. And it's you and I. You have a right to go do whatever you want to do. You can be your own master. You can go and find something else to rule over you, to reign over you. But if you've chosen that I want the Lord to be my master, I want to be a bondservant of Jesus Christ, just like Paul would say, and James would say, and Peter would say, I'm a bondservant, man. I've given up my rights. I don't have rights anymore. I gave them up because I belong to my master, Jesus. And all of this is leading up to that very commitment, that very thing. Go the dietary laws. Guys, it wasn't so much the food. It was, are you going to come under the rule of your master? It wasn't so much the tithe. God doesn't need our money. God can do whatever he wants to do. He owns it all. But is he really going to be your master? Whenever you cancel the debt after the 7th year, you're going to do it because he's your master. You're going to do it because this is what he's instructing me to do. And in me doing so, my master is going to bless me for doing it. It's that life of surrender to him. It's not, I don't own me anymore. He owns me. I don't have rights anymore. He has the rights over my life. You say, don't eat that, then I don't eat that. You tell me to release that guy from debt, then I release this guy from debt because I don't own me. God, you do. And God was going to teach the children of Israel, look, if I'm going to be your master, then you're going to have to learn to obey the things that I instruct you to. Whether you agree with it or make sense of it all, this is a matter of obedience to you because I'm your master. It's in verse 19, and we'll wrap this up. He says, the first male that comes from your herd and your flock, you shall sanctify to the Lord your God, and you shall do no work with the firstborn of your herd, nor shear the firstborn of your flock. And again, just how messed up we are, because God's got to instruct us. Look, if he didn't tell you don't do any work with that ox, or don't shear the first, the flock, we would, I'm going to shear him and then I'll take him to the Lord to offer him. Or I'll have him do all the labor on my field, and then after he's worn out, I'll take him to the Lord to offer him. And God goes, look, if you're going to bring your firstborn, you can't work him, and you can't shear him. And he says, you and your household shall eat it before the Lord your God year by year in the place which the Lord chooses. But if there's a defect in it, if it's lame or blind or has any serious defect, you shall not sacrifice it to the Lord your God. God doesn't want your leftovers. He goes, don't bring me, I don't want that animal. I'll give it to God. That thing's crippled, man. Blind little lamb. I know what I'll do with him. You're going to be the next sacrifice, dude. God, I want your best. If I'm going to be your Lord, then you got to give me your best. And he tells them, no defects. You may eat it within your gates. The unclean, the clean person, alike, you may eat it as it is, as if it were a gazelle or a deer. He goes, that three-legged sheep you got there, you eat away. Right? But don't bring it as a sacrifice. Don't give God what you don't want. And so he gives them clear instruction there. He says, only you shall not eat its blood. You shall pour it to the ground like water. And it's interesting that he would tell the children of Israel that they weren't to drink the blood, and they weren't to cook the meat in the blood, that the blood was the life, and the life was to be poured into the ground. They were to have respect for life. And the blood is the life. And Jesus would shed his blood for you. His life offered up for us.